All right. Well, good morning. Thank you for coming. We are the team of attorneys, family members, and community support announcing our lawsuit on behalf of MiChance Dunlap-Gittens, who was tragically taken and unjustifiably shot by King County Sheriff's deputies in a complete and unnecessary and unlawful use of force that was generated by the officers, creating a sting operation against teenagers that was completely unmoored and unchecked. And so today we have brought this lawsuit on behalf of both the family of Mr. Gittens, but also our community, because the issues involved in this lawsuit are extremely important. And so I want to briefly first introduce all of the individuals who are up here with us today. And so this representing the family is Alexis Dunlap, who is Chance's mother, and also Frank Gittens, Chance's father. And then also our legal team consists of a number of attorneys. We are housed here at McDonald Hogan Bayless, which is one of the firms working on the case. Also James Bible is here with us representing Frank, and also Pat, where did Pat go? Bossman, sorry I lost you, has been with the case for a long time and is staying on to continue. And I'm David B. Owens from Lovey & Lovey, law firm based in Chicago, but with practice here in Seattle in the Northwest. So the reason that we've asked you all to come today is because this is an exceptionally important case for us, and that's why there is such a broad team of individuals here who are working on this, because it is exceptionally important and raises issues that we believe need to be brought out and to hold folks accountable. So that's the reason we're here, obviously, and that's the case. I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with some of the facts, but I wanted to just address two of them in the following way, which is that the officer-involved shooting that happened in this particular case with respect to Chance is one that didn't need to happen. It didn't have to occur in any way whatsoever. It's not one of these instances in which officers were on the street, on the beat, and moving around the community, and they encountered somebody, and then there was some sudden thing that happened. It's exactly the opposite. It's a form of entrapment. Instead, what the sheriff deputies did here was they got online and interacted with some teenagers to draw them out of the house, and they were lying in wait. And they opened a van door, and at night, and immediately, or nearly immediately, started firing. And even as the boys ran away, they continued to shoot at them. This is not something that our community should tolerate. This is not something that any family should have to go through. And then the second thing about this case that I wanted to mention is that there was a review done, and there were a lot of issues seen with the entire operation that was created. But what's happened since then? Exactly. Nothing has happened since then. And so because nothing has happened since then, there's been no measure of accountability, there's been no measure of reform. It is incumbent upon us to use the law as a tool for bringing about that change and accountability, because we're left with no other recourse. And so I wanted to have both of Chance's parents talk a little bit about their experience in dealing with this process over the past couple of years.
Okay. Well, I'm Chance's mother, and the loss of my son is just unimaginable. It didn't have to happen. He was a typical teenage kid. He was 17 years old, about to graduate from high school. He was at home, and he was a bright and very intellectual child. I knew that he was going to be great, and then all of that has been taken away. I'll never see him grow up and have the family that I wanted him to have, or get the education I wanted him to have, or travel the world like I wanted him to do. It's just, nothing has happened. They took his life, and then I'm just left to feel the pain. I'm just left to deal with the aftermath, and it keeps happening to everyone. It keeps happening all over the United States, and it's unexcusable. And I want justice. I want someone to answer and let me know what has been done since this happened, and how we're going to prevent it from happening again.
Good morning. My name is Frank Gittens. I'm MiChance Dunlap-Gittens' father. I'm just here today to it's been a long 2.5 years. When this first happened, the thing that me and his mother was looking forward to was him going to his graduation, to see him graduate. And we never got that opportunity. Instead, we had to plan the funeral. And it's not something that, again, we wanted to be a part of. We were pulled into this, and it's been a long 2 years plus. We know Chance was a good kid. We know he didn't deserve to go out like this. Alexis and myself, we were the only ones in the room when those surgeons came in that room, and they told us that Chance was shot multiple times, and we probably could have saved him except for the kill shot to his head, and that's the reason why he died. And that's something that's been going through my head every single day for the last 2+ years, and I know it's been going through Alexis' head for the last 2.5 years. And it's just, and just seeing, pictures of his body and things of that nature, and having to review those things and talk about them and talk about it with other people, and to even do this is something that's just mind-boggling to me. But I just want to, again, thank everybody for coming in, and I want to thank all the people that supported us and is going to continue to support us, and all the people behind me, to the side of me, to the right of me. And we're going to need even more support and more hugs and more everything going forward, because we're going to be in this for the long haul, and we do want justice. We do want people to be held accountable, and they will be held accountable if it's the last thing that we do. And that's all I got. Thank you very much.
So, I think, as you could tell, this is a serious case for us, and it's a serious case for the family, but it's also one for the community here. Is you have 2 teenagers who are, shot at by the police as they were running away. And I think, as Frank just mentioned, the Chance would be alive but for being shot in the back of the head as he was running away back up to his parents' his mother's apartment. And so this is not something that our community should tolerate. And this is not something that our community can afford to tolerate. And so part of the reason that we've brought this suit and we've announced this case today is not just to focus on this particular officer-involved shooting, but to talk about the structures that are in place here in King County, in Seattle, and in Washington State generally. We're involved in a broader conversation about police reform. One of the individuals at the heart of that in Seattle got a MacArthur Genius Award this week. But there are still fundamental problems here in this community. Everything's not so rosy. So, for example, King County Sheriff's Office investigates homicides committed by other police officers. Who investigates them? If you have the same individuals working on the same process and the same procedures investigating their friends, there's not an opportunity for accountability there. And so sometimes the only mechanism we have is to bring a lawsuit, to bring light upon the issues here, is because does the broader community know that in 16, 17, 18 different ways, the incident, the shooting that happened here that ended Chance's life was deemed unreasonable and a departure from department policies? Does anybody know about that? And if nobody knows about that, do they have a concern that anything was done and that nothing has been done? And so for those reasons, we brought this suit, and to seek accountability for Chance, but also for those in the community. And if anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Do you, are you aware of the law that was passed on the ballot that would require independent investigations that is currently in the works?
Yes, and so one of the main issues with respect to independent investigations is that those investigations have accountability, and they not be, as I just said, by officers or agencies who are their friends. And so one of the important things that I believe that you need is community involvement, is because Wisconsin was the first state to pass such a law. And in Wisconsin, what actually happened is it became harder to get accountability because there was just an additional layer of sort of police whitewashing that happened because they said, oh, this, that. And it was even harder to dig some of that process up. So it's important that any oversight have a civilian component, that there be something outside of that law enforcement echo chamber bringing a form of accountability to those issues.
Is there anything else specific that you'd like to see done about statewide and in the county?
I'm sure if you put us all together, we'd have a laundry list of things like that. Eliminate racial bias against black men, right? So there's a whole bunch of things, but there are different things that can be done, and I think that civilian and community oversight, with respect to officers, you've got de-escalation training, things like that, and then in this particular instance, you have a group of officers going on and essentially going rogue. And there was no mechanism that stopped that whatsoever. And so what are the mechanisms that are going to be put in place to make sure that when you're doing surveillance and different things like that, that it's being tracked accountably, so there are lots of different ways to avoid that. And then I think in the aftermath, it is this, which is no one ever wants to admit that they made a mistake. But that's something that needs to happen. There's no way to get healing, or it's extremely difficult to get healing if individuals cannot admit that they made a mistake. Can these officers really come to say, and there was a teenager running away from me that I shot in the back of the head, and I don't think for 1 second that anything I did, I could even maybe think, would I do that differently? And it's those types of questions that we have to ask. How could you do this differently to prevent it from happening again? And those aren't being asked.
There's no real mention in the complaint about the underlying issue that led to this sting operation, which was the police, or the sheriff's office, focusing on these two young men as suspects in a crime, the homicide of another police officer's son. Why is that not brought up in the complaint?
Well, so the law with respect to the officer's use of force and deadly force here pertains to the situation that confronted them at the time. And whatever happened in this other incident and 45 miles away 3 days earlier that led them there, there's a situation on the ground. And they wouldn't have been authorized to use deadly force because something happened 2 days later. And so the emphasis of this lawsuit is what happened in the crucial moments between when you have officers sitting in a van outside of the house pretending to be looking teenagers themselves and pretending to, well, oh, look, let's bring in some women, or pretend to be that will draw these boys out of the house. This form of entrapment and this setting the trap for them, that's the whole shooting. And so we analyze it based upon the actions that the officers encountered at the time. And these crucial moments when you've got those, so that's really why that's the focus, is because they wouldn't be any more or less justified based upon what happened the 2 days before.
Has the family heard anything from the sheriff's office since the shooting?
Personally, no. We have, Washington law requires that we give them notice of a upcoming lawsuit, right? And so that's a mechanism where the sheriff's office had the opportunity to say, oh man, we know this is coming, and we can seek to alleviate the lawsuit. And they denied our claim, and so we are here today. And that's formally what we've heard from the sheriff's office.
Can you speak a little about the specifics of what happened?
I can. It's an interesting. No, it's just funny as about the moment to start. So you've got a group of King County Sheriff's deputies who are investigating a separate incident that happened in Beaver Lake, and for reasons that I won't go fully into, they decide that they want to focus on a teenager who we've identified in the complaint as DR. And they decide that we want to go focus on him. And the way that they do that is not by, asking for a warrant, showing up at his house, trying to talk to his friends. Instead, they're like, why don't we do this? Let's get a bunch of SWAT cars in the neighborhood, and then we'll pull up in a van, and we'll pretend that we want to buy alcohol. So DR is on Facebook trying to sell some alcohol. Who knows where he got it? I got some champagne, I've got some of this, I got some of that, I got some vodka, and just trying to sell it. Not a good move, but he's a kid selling booze. And the officers decide that they're going to try to draw him out of the house, and when he gets close to the van, pop out of the van and say, "We got you." And when they decided to do that, DR shows up with somebody that they didn't know, and that's Chance. And this is where everything goes awry. And because the officers had asked for so many bottles, they're walking out there, fumbling around, and when the officers open the door, almost immediately, the boys begin to run away, and the officers begin to fire on them. And that's really what it is. And so the bullet wounds and the medical evidence in this case, as we mentioned a few times here, Chance would be alive, but for being shot in the back of the head. And that's the crux of the case.
And those deputies said that both teens had guns that they pulled on them. It sounds like you guys question that.
Oh, we dispute it completely. Yeah, so that is completely disputed, and neither of these teenagers, we believe, hold guns at the officers. They didn't even have the opportunity for a couple of reasons. One, the amount of time, and two, because they were holding the alcohol bottles that they were still running away with. So the physical evidence that we're aware of today, before really getting into things, is the basis for us saying that. And this is actually one of the crucial things that we see in officer-involved shootings time and time again where there's no accountability, is that there's objective physical evidence from the crime scene that contradicts the officer's accounts, but no one ever questions it. They say, oh, well, that's fine. And so that's part of the problem here, and so we have to pick up the pieces, and we have to say, how could this have really gone down, and how, when we're looking at the objective physical evidence, we've got to contrast it with them just saying all of those things. So I don't buy it for a second.
Could you detail a little bit more about your allegations regarding the officers specifically who were involved and their previous incident that's noted in your complaint?
Sure. So the officers who were involved here, one of them had a previous incident where he was alleged to have used force excessively. And as the Washington State Supreme Court recently held and explained, is that us as private citizens, we are owed a duty of care by police officers. And that means that if you have an officer who exercises poor judgment, you don't put them in charge of other people with an opportunity to exercise that poor judgment, because that can lead to unnecessary death. And so that's a form of negligence. And the municipality, because look, if an officer gets behind you and turns on the light, you have an obligation to pull over. If they give you a command, and so officers wield immense power. On the flip side of that immense power is immense responsibility. And so when you have officers who have been shown to exercise poor judgment, and where there's reason to believe that they might do it again, the municipality, and here, King County, it has to take a look, and they have to make sure that their officers are using their immense power, which we have all entrusted in them as part of an ordered society, to use carefully and responsibly. And so we believe that wasn't followed here, and particularly when King County itself evaluated the shooting, noted a number of problems, but I haven't heard of any reforms. I haven't heard of anybody being put on any type of retraining. So how are officers been further trained so that this doesn't happen again? Have there been other protocols implemented? And we haven't seen any of that. They may say we've changed everything, which would be great. But at the time of this, our point is that they should have known that this type of an incident was something that was reckless, and it was dangerous, and it was always likely to cause unjustified harm to the community.
What does justice look like then at the end of this?
Well, I think that if you see the family and friends and sisters and hear, there's no form of complete justice in a circumstance like this, not at all. And at the end of the day, I think we're always trying to get some measure of accountability, some measure of justice, some recognition that another black juvenile was killed unnecessarily, and that means something, and that he's not just a name, that Chance had a life, and that we want the community to understand that, and that there is some measure, that the officers are held to account in some way. And that I think ideally that there's some reform. And so there is change, you know. So one way to bring about change you mentioned is at the ballot box. Another way to hopefully bring about some change is with the lawsuit, and that's what we hope to account for here to get some measure of justice for Chance.
And are you familiar with I-940? Is there anything beyond what was in our initiative that was passed that's going to be implemented soon that you want to see specifically as far as reform?
I don't think that there's a specific thing. It was so in the context of our litigation and our limited universe as little attorneys, is that what we can ask for are changes that are related to the things that happen in our particular lawsuit at the department level, and that's, I think, what we will seek. So a lot of lawsuits, we've named not only the officers who were involved in the shooting, but also King County itself. And part of the reason for doing that is to focus on the policies and practices and customs and procedures of King County and the King County Sheriff's Department to try to enforce change. And that's something that we've been successful in other lawsuits, and having, you know, whether it's changing your standard operating procedures or changing how you investigate officer-involved shootings, we have been able to secure change in other cases, and we hope for the same thing here.
This
So-
incident happened under the prior administration at the sheriff's office, but how does that come into play here?
Well, it's on their watch, and discovery will tell. Yeah.